Hello, today I will be talking about the biases that come with the cost of living, and more specifically how CPI overstates inflation. The first bias is substitution bias. Substitution bias comes to light when consumers have a change in what they purchase because of relative changes in price. Furthermore, when prices change, consumers usually buy more of the cheaper good and less of the more expensive goods. This bias occurs because the inflation rate accounts for a fixed basket of goods and does not account for price changes. An example of substitution bias is when the price of tea increases, so consumers substitute tea for coffee, which is now less expensive than tea. The CPI won't account for the increase in the price of tea, so the inflation rate will be overstated and will show an upward substitution bias. The second bias is quality bias. Quality bias occurs when there is a miscalculation in the CPI because the quality of the good changes over time and is hard to account for. CPI tends to overstate the inflation rate because the quality of goods tends to increase, which leads to an upward outlet bias. An example of quality bias is the idea that a smartphone today is more technologically advanced than computers in the 1970s. Therefore, inflation is overstated because the CPI is not accounting for the improvement in technology. The third bias is outlet bias. Outlet bias occurs when consumers choose to shop at places that provide lower prices for the same goods that are produced at other retail shops. CPI does not account for the discounted prices, so they take the price of the goods without the discount when accounting for inflation, which overstates the CPI and creates an upward outlet bias. This bias is similar to substitution bias. An example of outlet bias is when a consumer shops at the outlet mall where prices of goods are sold at a discounted price. CPI tends to overstate inflation because CPI accounts for the real price of the good instead of the discounted price. The final bias is the new product bias. New product bias occurs when new goods and services are introduced into our market that are not accounted for in the CPI. New products are invented every year and old products sometimes disappear. The invention and disappearance of these goods are not accounted for by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. This bias can be compared to quality bias because technological advances improve the quality of new products, and the CPI is overstated and has an upward new product bias. An example of new innovation bias is the idea that smartphones would not be introduced until the 1998 and would not be accounted for straight away, which is why the good will not be incorporated into the CPI when it was created. A solution to these biases is the hedonic quality adjustments. The hedonic quality adjustments first deconstructs the good to its main characteristics, then takes the value of each of those characteristics, and finally takes those values and uses them to adjust prices when the quality of the good changes.